May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom.
Everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So, a day in change, how appropriate. Once upon a time, in my own life, about not quite 2 decades ago, I came upon an unstable time of finding myself surprised, maybe you can't relate to this, but surprised, mild mental illness. Oh. Sorry, quick way to change the tone. In my case, just mild anxiety and depressive disorder. A lot of people don't necessarily relate to that as mental illness, but I like to try to take the stigma off of that because a lot of people struggle with these kinds of things. So that came on me sort of out of the blue, and it was a nice double whammy because not only does that destabilize your world, like if anybody has ever dealt with this kind of thing, or a family or friend or spouse, it destabilizes your appointment making ability, it destabilizes your ability to go out of the house and do things. And so not only does your world get less stable, but then every instability feels about 10 times as big because you're dealing with anxiety. Long personal story short, I found nice holistic ways to get that under control. And I realized that one of the triggers was when I embroiled myself in too much stress or when I let my schedule get too busy. And so one of the great coping mechanisms was you learn how to not let your schedule get too busy, how not to dive so deep into that much stress. Recently, I had a surprise stress embroilment. I sort of did it to myself by entering a situation that I wasn't quite prepared for. And after years and years of just feeling just fine and vigorous and engaged in the world, all of a sudden again it's, oh, well, I got to cancel an appointment because I'm just kind of freaking out. The world feels very unstable. So this went on. Normally, I got used to, okay, well, you just take a nap. Right? And then, you just chill out, take the weekend off for the first time in a few months or something like that. Things cool down. This time it just didn't cool down. And about 6 months later, I'm taking a walk, and there's this heart palpitation thing, and the body feels kind of weak, and you can't really listen to the news because, it's weird out there. The news doesn't give you any of the good stuff. It just gives you sort of the awful stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, well, what do you do about this? And by grace, the grace of my unconscious or the grace of some higher power, I'm not really sure, but I had a memory of a time when I had just finished a meditation retreat. I had done this very simple diet, so I sort of, if anybody's ever fasted, you'll know that maybe 3 or 4 days into a certain fast or cleanse the mind, sort of like, it just settles down. The first 3 days are awful. It's like, oh my gosh, when can I get a piece of chocolate? Pizza. What if I ate all the pizza? Yes, with chocolate on it. I don't even care. It's like that. And then at about day 3.5, the mind all suddenly settles down, and you'll hear things from people who have fasted for 5 days or something like that, and they're like, I don't think I'll ever eat again. Because it feels so like there's just something like you stop spinning some wheel, and you learn to shift into a different gear where everything just kind of settles down. So somehow, I'm taking this walk, and my life's been, outwardly, I held it together. Mostly, except for 3 appointments I had. But inwardly, though, my life is a little like, oh gosh, when is this going to stop? Get me off the roller coaster. And as I'm walking along, this body sense memory came. It's like, remember that feeling at the end of a fast? Remember that feeling in the middle of that meditation retreat? And somehow I was able to shift my mind from, oh, something's really going wrong, and see, look, something's really wrong. Into balance. There was some trick I found to be able to, I focused on my breath. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. And all of a sudden, all of this sort of rattling in the cage just settled itself down. I had found, for a moment, stability in an unstable world. And why this is a great story to share is that stability continued. I found a trick, not just a fish for a day, but I taught myself how to fish. Okay, that wasn't in my notes. We'll work on that for next time. So this is what they might call mindfulness meditation. I'm sure if you've read any sort of Scientific American or Psychology Today or something like that, you've heard of this mindfulness meditation. And the good news is that it's not just my anecdotal story that this stuff works. It's actually been proven numerous times. The only little reference I got was from a group of researchers at Johns Hopkins. They wanted to review all of the literature to see, well, how well designed are these studies? And they found 47 great studies that they then published their commentary in the Journal of the American Medical Association that showed, well-designed studies that showed mindfulness meditation significantly decreases anxiety, depression, and stress. So these are well-proven things, right? So the first thing I want to do is do a little practice with mindfulness meditation of this specific variety to find stability in an unstable world. So if you would, make sure you're sitting comfortably. That can be with your legs crossed, sit back, or posture upright like you learned in finishing school or whatever it was for you. Good. Your eyes, I suggest closed to get rid of distractions, but you can also just kind of look down and unfocus your gaze. We won't be here for very long. So take a couple breaths and notice your breath. And revel in the feeling of only having to breathe, right? You don't have to do anything else. You just get to enjoy your in-breath and enjoy your out-breath. Okay, that's the appetizer. Now the real meditation is I want you to try to notice the thoughts moving around in your brain. Don't try to stop them in favor of your breath or something. Just notice the thoughts that you're thinking. So there they go again. Sometimes the thoughts whirl very fast, sometimes they go slow, sometimes they seem very enticing, sometimes they seem very repulsive or impulsive. Just notice it. And then last step, see if you can notice who's noticing. There's a clear aspect of yourself that sees the thoughts whirling around. See if you can, for a moment, be the person who's hearing yourself think. Not the thinker, but the one who witnesses the thoughts. And then take a couple of deep breaths, just enjoying your breath again. And you can open your eyes if they're closed. Okay. Anybody find it? The clear witness who's not wrapped up in the whirling of the thoughts? Or are you in too much of a meditative state to raise your... Okay, so a couple... I don't know what... so a couple of us found it. If you didn't find it, don't worry. This stuff takes practice. But the good news is a method by which you can source a feeling of clarity, stability, and peace anytime you want. So, I don't know if this is a great image. This is the one that I found. It seems like, according to this, that like whirling around in the circumference would be more fun than it is. But imagine, so this imagery of the merry-go-round, imagine you were stuck on a merry-go-round that just kept spinning and spinning, and you could never get off. It stops being quite as fun. Right? I mean, a merry-go-round is fun for a little while. True or false? Merry-go-round is fun for a little while. True, right? Merry-go-round is fun forever. No, it's not fun forever. And yet, this is often the experience of the human mind and the human emotional body. Right? Has anybody ever noticed this? That like, maybe not all the time, but at certain periods in your life, right? The mind just whirls, and it's like, get me off this crazy thing. Make it stop. You're waiting for that merry-go-round music to wind down. So the metaphor that they often use for this type of meditation practice is that this merry-go-round doesn't have it. But, some wheels, they have a stable part in the middle that's not turning, and everything turns around that axis or that axle. So we're learning with our mind to withdraw from the circumference, from the spinny part that we've been on just a little too long. It's starting to get queasy. And move into the stable part. And then you can watch spinny stuff over, you can look at the sky, you can do whatever you want, because you've got to take a break from the spinny part. So this, though, is not a sermon about it's good to meditate. Right? Like I said, you can read Scientific American and they'll tell you that. You can read Psychology Today and they'll tell you that. Right? But it's a sermon about finding stability in an unstable world. And there are meditators who have found a way to do this. But there are also Christians who wouldn't say they meditate who have found a way to do this. There are business people who wouldn't say they meditate, but they found some way for themselves to get this sense of stability in an unstable world. What are some of your ways that you've used when the world feels unstable to gain this sense of stability? Does anybody have one that you already have?
Prayer.
What is it?
Prayer.
Prayer can be a great one, according to today's thesis, because it takes you from all the problems and it brings you into maybe a state of surrender or a state of inner strength. What about in the back, the Fitch family?
Writing, especially like a free write, at times writing.
Right, yeah, so journaling or free writing or morning pages or something like this can be a great one. Any others? Yes? Reading. Oh, it's one of my favorites. And you just read the book, pass out for a minute, wake up, and everything's all better. It's really nice. So, yeah.
Exercising, like going for a walk.
Yeah, going for a walk. I found lifting weights works really, I don't know, it works the best ever. How interesting. Okay, one more. Yes.
A nightly bubble bath.
Nightly bath can be fabulous. So, all of these I propose to you are consistent with my thesis that we've used some method to take us from all the whirly-twirly things, and you just focus on something else, and it starts to bring that inner sense of stability. So I'm a big fan of mindfulness, right? But I'm a big fan of meditation, but if you study it for a while, it starts to bring up these questions, right? Like if you get deep and philosophical, which I won't, we don't have time for that today. But there's this sense of like, is there really a witness that can say, so how many of me are there in there? Is there actually a clear space, or am I just like toggling really fast? And isn't that just as stressful? And well, the long-term reports say it's not just as stressful. But interestingly, I was recently, as such things go, I said, I'm going to do a sermon. After that experience, actually, where I found my breath again, and all of a sudden, life wasn't so stressful. I said, I got to do a sermon on this. And as such things often go, synchronistically, I happened to be reading this book that I didn't know this was what it was about, and it started talking about exactly the principles that I wanted to incorporate into the sermon, but from a scientific side. So, still on the Eastern side, in Eastern traditions, often they'll talk about two aspects to yourself. Sometimes, have you heard this? The true self and the false self. Has anybody heard that terminology in your theosophical reading group or something? Right? Or how about the ego and the higher self? Right? Like that's not too uncommon, right? So a lot of this comes from an old Hindu idea. One guy they call the ahamkara. And if you want fun, please say ahamkara. Fun. So ahamkara is what often gets translated as ego, and literally it means the me maker. Me maker. And the etymology of it is cool because the word for me or I is aham. And I always think that's kind of like what my ego does when it wants attention. Somebody's over here. And then kara means like karma, which means to create, this word create, same. So it's the creator of, excuse me. And they contrast this with another cat that they call Atman. Some of you have heard this like Mahatma Gandhi, the Atman, right? And sometimes they call this the true self or the higher self. But then there's this thing like, is this just quaint Eastern philosophy? And some of us have had experience of this, but could we validate this experience? So this information comes from a really cute book that I recommend, which is called You Are Not Your Brain. You Are Not Your Brain. And before you go sending me Richard Dawkins texts, text by Reverend Chris Schreiner that shows that you are your brain, I'll defend what they're talking about. They're not posing the thesis that your consciousness exists somewhere else. That's a whole different talk. But rather, that there's a part of you that's made mostly of deceptive brain messages. And there's another part of you that's free of these habitual, deceptive brain messages. If you like science, you can get out your pen, and you'll realize they break it down. They call one part of you the self-referencing center in your brain, which is composed of the medial prefrontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex. Oh, good, nobody's writing this. So this is the self-referencing center. They also say you have a part of your brain called the up-o center, which we've heard of like your limbic system. Oh, I had a limbic system hijacked. So this is composed of your amygdala, your cingulate, and your insula. They call it up-o center. And the thing about this book that really sort of hooked me was that they showed how your self-referencing center and your up-o center are wired very closely together. Because when the up-o goes off, it sends its message directly to this executive control center so that you can do something, right? So it's sort of biologically smart to have these centers wired really closely together. But a problem happens because this wiring also makes it likely that you are going to develop an erroneous conclusion that the pain and stress I feel is me. The pain and stress I feel is me. So in each one of our brains, maybe you're not overwhelmed by pain and stress, but we all have weird habits that we would probably like to change. Please, to make me feel better, raise your hand if you have a weird habit that you might like to change at some point in your life. Right? Okay, thank you. I'm a double hander. So what they propose is the you that has these weird habits, right? This is the part that they might call the ego or the false self or something like that. And it's made up of a false identification in your brain. You've wired these habits so strongly that the minute the O center fires, you think, well, you don't think this, but the brain goes, oh, right, I know what to do. This is where I freak out, and then when I eat ice cream, I calm that down again, and I establish this Pavlovian response that makes me freak out so that I can get ice cream. Really cool. Unless, you're trying to lose that last 3 pounds or something like that, and then it's a real problem that your brain, this is how smoking cigarettes work. I used to be a cigarette smoker. And the brain, part of how you keep yourself addicted, cigarette nicotine floods you with serotonin and dopamine specifically for a short period of time. So in order to get you to take the next puff or light the next one up, the brain actually starts to drain out serotonin and dopamine, giving you this momentary lack so that you'll light up and go again. It's really dumb. So this, they would call the false self, right? And we can notice this. This is really the one who's out there spinning the wheel. Oh, they're going to get me off the merry-go-round. The good news, they say, is that you have a lateral prefrontal cortex. That's right. And they gave this one another cute name. That's the really good news, so you don't have to remember lateral prefrontal cortex. But they call this the assessment center. So you have the chance to voluntarily interrupt this cycle of, uh-oh, that's me, right? And the thing can go, uh-oh, and you go, let's look at this. The lateral prefrontal cortex has this job of taking a look at the stress messages and deciding which method of action I should take. So to me, this sounds exactly like what we are facilitating when we practice things like this witnessing meditation. You step back from the habitual whirling of your mind, and you say, let's just take a look at this for a moment. So when you do this, it's really cool because it lands you in this neat place called the present moment. Has anybody ever had has anybody ever had an experience that dropped you into the present moment? Like, raise your hand if it was like listening to music. You listen to a really good piece of music and you're like, bam, in the present moment. Or like, dancing. Anybody dance their way to the present moment? Okay, Taekwondo or Kung Fu, or that's only me. Oh, good, a couple of us, right? Falling in love. Falling in love, good. Right? So, and it feels good to be in the present moment, right? So, they propose, these meditators and these brain psychologists propose that you could find ways to get yourself into the present moment. And so recall this time, however you got there, Japanese flower arranging, or meditating, or falling in love, or whatever it was, a dinner so good you couldn't be anywhere else, delicious, right? Whatever it was. But notice, did the world feel particularly unstable when you were dropped into the present moment? No. And even you'll hear stories from soldiers on the battlefield, or nonviolent warriors at the front of the protest line. Like, when the stuff was really hitting the fan, everything got clear. There's only what you do right now. So this is kind of cool. But, and I'm talking fast because I don't really have very much time. And I have all of this material prepared, so I'm going to try to spit it all out in 3 minutes. So, I have a problem with the present moment, though, because the rhetoric around it might make you a hippie. Not this kind of hippie, this kind that's going to save the world, but the kind that's like, hey, man, I mean, the world is unstable, but what can you do? There's swells coming in down in Capitola, and I know Habitat for Humanity is going on, but like the swells, bro. And I was just in the moment, I know that like the stuff I bought at the store was probably made by slave labor, but like my new phone, like it tells me the swells, bro. And like I'm just abiding, in the moment. And okay, I don't know that many people like that, but there's this fear that like if you just like, hey, oh no, the world's unstable. No, I just don't watch the news. Yeah, I have cute hippie friends who tell me this, right? And it's like it's a little bit lacking in compassion. It's a little bit lacking in responsiveness. It's a present moment. Oh, I know how to make the world stable. You get an eye mask and earplugs and submerge yourself in salt water. And you won't feel anything. Maybe it's, Novocaine or something like that. So that's not what we're talking about. The nice thing about this wise advocate, they call it, when you get in touch with your assessment center, they say you build a new part of yourself. They call it the wise advocate. Has anyone here ever had a moment when you were about to do something weird and your wise advocate intervened in your mind, right? Gandalf in your mind. You're going to the refrigerator on the third day of your new diet. You shall not pass! Something lights you up inside. So rather than taking us away from wisdom and compassion, we want to find a way into the present moment that sets us into wisdom and compassion. We want to find a way that if we get right here, we are not in the future and the past stress of these deceptive brain messages, this whirling, swirling, taking us away, but we can actually hear the voice of virtue that's coming from inside of us. As we talked about a few weeks ago, the Greeks felt that the happiness that comes from virtue, they call eudaimonic happiness, is actually a more sustainable form of happiness than the happiness that comes from a really good beer, which I had last night, so don't diss that, but it was quite tasty. And yet, would I exchange that present moment experience for living a life in line with my values? No. But to get in line with my values, I actually need to be here now. Anything else is a little bit like a source of manipulation, right? I find myself sometimes, I had to turn off the radio when I drive most days, because I found myself, they say, oh yeah, well this guy got shot today, and this person says it's this one's fault, and this person says it's this one's fault. And all my cognitive biases come up, and they go, yeah, I think that person's right, who says it's this person's fault. And what should we reactively do? Who should we put on a list somewhere so that we can be safe? Right? And it's a little bit manipulative when you're in the moment of stress without having first asked, who am I? What are my values? What are my virtues? And we just, some stimulus comes up, and we respond. We bite. This is the value of the present moment. It sets us in to a non-manipulated place in ourselves. This wise advocate, this Gandalf within. So you don't have to take my word for it. I stacked the deck with Unitarian quotes. This one's from Horace Mann. Perhaps I do not know what I was made for. This is a little cut off on the screen. But one thing I certainly never was made for, and that is to put principles on and off at the dictation of a party as a lackey changes his livery at his master's command. So to find this strength within, it doesn't seem like at least that we're often called to have to find this inner strength, right? It doesn't seem like you're going to walk out of the church and you're going to have a moral crisis. But I imagine if we walked through the world, not like we were in crisis, but like it was our job to find this resolute center in ourselves. A lot of the stresses and the weird things that come along, they would be, like a lot of people express this word, bittersweet. It wouldn't be, oh my gosh, something's happening in Libya, and what do we do? The world is sweet. It's so messed up because you know what you're supposed to do. You found the trick that when you're in the present moment, you can make distinctions between what you're able to control and what you're not able to control. What you're able to control are your virtues, your values, and your choices. What you're not able to control are things happening in Turkey. Things happening, control happens. This isn't a time when we're going to be able to necessarily pray your favorite political candidate into office, even though it looks like they might really not get there. It's not about forcing the world this way, and then someone's going to come from some other realm, and wow, it's going to be really fabulous, and you'll have found your stability. Instead, it's about understanding